Hello Year 11 and welcome back to your first lesson after the Christmas holidays. Obviously we're in lockdown again, so this is the sort of lessons that we'll be doing until further notice. So our lesson today, we are just carrying on from the topic that we were doing before, so we were on to variation before. We're doing variation now. So we were doing genetics before, we're on to variation specifically. So what I want you to write down is the date, title and LO, and then I want you to try the starter tasks. You can take as long as you want to do the starter tasks. So if you pause it here and I will go on to the answers in 5 seconds. Okay, the answer to question 1. So what is a phenotype? So the phenotype is a gene that is expressed in the individual. In other words, it's what an organism looks like. So someone might have the recessive allele for blue eyes in their genotype, but they've also got the dominant allele for brown eyes in their genotype. So the phenotype would be the brown eyes because that's dominant. So it's the one that is actually expressed. Next one, put these in order. So from smallest to biggest, it's gene, chromosome, nucleus, cell. Obviously, if you did it from biggest to smallest, it would be cell, nucleus, chromosome, gene. You are correct either way. Next one, brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes. What is the genotype of a blue-eyed person? So if something is dominant, it would be a capital letter. In this case, we are using the letter B because brown and blue both start with B. So a capital B would be used for brown because that is dominant. A lowercase b would be used for blue because that is recessive. For a recessive gene to show, you must have 2 of them. If there is a dominant one, then the dominant one is the one that will be shown. So this person can't have a capital B in their genotype, otherwise they would have brown eyes. So they have 2 recessive genes for blue eyes. 2 brown-eyed people, that should say, 2 brown-eyed people have a blue-eyed child. Draw a diagram to explain. So we've done lots of practice with these. So what you do is you draw like a little noughts and crosses grid, and then at the top we've got one parent's genotype, and down the side we've got another parent's genotype. Now we know that these parents would have had to have had a recessive gene for blue somewhere in their genotype, because if either of these parents had a homozygous genotype for brown eyes, so if this was a capital and that was a capital, then all of their children would have brown eyes. So we know that they both have to have heterozygous genes. So we have BB here, lowercase b, which means that that child has blue eyes. So they have a 25% chance that their child will have blue eyes. Okay, and last of the starter questions, what are the symptoms of polydactyly? That is the one where you have extra digits, so extra fingers or extra toes. Okay, moving on with today's lesson, we are talking about variation. So the definition of variation is that there are differences between organisms. So if you look at the pictures below, these are all apples, but they all have variation between them. So if you talk about the differences between them, then that is talking about the variation. Okay, so they're all the same species, they're all apples, but we have red ones, we've got green ones, we've got big apples with bits of yellow on them, we've got tiny apples that are yellowish in colour. Okay, they're all still apples, we still eat them, but if you've eaten a red apple and eaten a green apple, you'll know they taste slightly different as well. So variation isn't just what it looks like, it can also be what it tastes like if we're talking about food. So what causes it? Variation may be due to genes, so something that is inherited from parents. It may be due to the conditions they have developed, so from the environment, or it could be a combination of both. And we're going to go through an example now. I just want you to write down those 3 things, please. So if you pause it and write it down, and I will carry on in 5 seconds. Okay, example 1. So this here is a picture of me and my older sister when we were younger. So some of you might have been taught by my older sister at primary school. So this is us when we were younger, obviously very fashionable at the time. So this is an example of two people who are related. So it's going to be very similar, but there still are some variations within a family. Okay, so we both have green eyes. I've put a G here because that is genetic. We've got that from our parents. We both have blonde hair when we were younger, so I've put G again for genetics. Okay, so that was passed down from our parents. My older sister has slightly darker hair than me, but it's still blondish on the ends. So it's similar enough. It's passed down through genetics though. We've both got pale skin, so I've put a C for combination here because it is a combination of the environment and genetics. So we were born with pale skin, but obviously if one of us spends more time in the sun, then one of us is going to have darker skin than the other. So it's a combination. Hair length is environmental. Obviously you cut your hair. If you let your hair grow in continuously and never ever cut it, then that would be genetics, but people don't tend to do that. So in this case, we have our hair cut to the same length, and that is an environmental factor because someone has physically cut that for us. In this case, it was my mum who did it. Okay, and the last one, a bit of a joke one, obviously impeccable fashion sense. That is from the environment. Alright, differences. So I have more prominent freckles than my older sister. You can't really see them in this photo. I put it as combined because obviously I inherited my freckles from my mum, but you don't really see them in wintertime. They come out in the sun, so they're more in summertime. So freckles is actually a combination. Our height is different, obviously, because we're at different ages at this moment, but height can also be affected by genetics. So now that I'm grown up, I'm still a little bit shorter than my older sister. It can also be affected by the environment. So say someone didn't eat a lot of food, they would tend to not grow as tall, that sort of thing. Or if you have a disease, or if you take medication that stunts your growth, that sort of thing. So talking about variation, this is my family here, well, the females in my family, so my mum, me, my younger sister and my older sister. Obviously you can see that we are all very similar, and that is because variation is mostly due to genetics. Okay, so we all have very similar genes. Obviously we got my sisters and I got all our genes from my mum and our dad, so we all look very similar. There's not much variation between family members. So now we're going to go through an example of me and someone who's not my family member and look at the variation between us. So actually the only picture I could really find of me and someone who's not in my family is a picture of me in the Fat Controller from Thomas the Tank Engine when I was a bit younger and had red hair. Unfortunately, that's what we're having to deal with here. So our similarities are we both have pale skin, so we're not related, but it doesn't mean that everything about us has to look crazy different. And we both have dimples, which are genetic as well. Okay, differences. So weight. Now weight is a combination of genetic and environmental factors because you can have genetic conditions that are more likely to make you put on weight or not put on weight, but it's also to do with the environment. Obviously, if you eat a lot more than the other person, then you're going to gain more weight. If you eat a lot less, then you're going to have less weight. So that is a combination of environmental and genetic factors. Height, as I've mentioned in the previous video, the previous slide, is a combination of environmental and genetic factors. Eye color, so he's got brown eyes from what I can see in this picture. Obviously, I don't know him personally. I can't see it very well, but it looks like he's got brown eyes. Mine are greenish blue, so we've got different eye colors. That is genetic. Hair color is a combination. Obviously, I have dyed hair here, but we've both got different hair colors. It's a combination. Even if we were talking about genetics, I have a different hair color to him because his is very, very dark. And freckles. I have freckles, he doesn't. Okay, so what I want you to do now is I want you to list 20 differences between you and a friend. It doesn't have to be someone in your house, but if you're choosing someone who is not living with you at the moment, obviously you can't go out and look at them. So make sure it's someone that you know really well what they look like, or you can do it over video call with one of the friends from the classes. So I want you to list 20 differences between you and a friend, and I want you to state whether these differences are caused by the environment, genetics, or a combination of both. So it's just getting you practicing thinking about what is environmental, what's genetics, and what's the combination, because these sorts of questions can come up in the tests. So if you pause the video here and do that, and I will carry on in 5 seconds. Okay, so the variation over time is actually caused by mutations. Okay, so mutations are constantly occurring inside us, and it's very rarely will lead to a new phenotype. Obviously, this is something that happens over a very, very long time. However, if the new phenotype suits a change that's occurred to the environment, it will change the species rapidly. So we have an example here of peppered moths. So the most common peppered moth a very long time ago was this white one at the bottom. In England, we've got a lot of birch trees, which we have on the school grounds. As you're walking into school, you'll see them. So they're white and they've got little black lines in them, sort of. So this moth here blended in really well with the birch trees, which meant it was less likely to get eaten by predators. So there were a lot of white moths that survived. The black ones were easier to see, so they got eaten more, and so there were less of the black ones than the white ones. However, the Industrial Revolution happened, and then loads of black soot was covering all of the trees. Suddenly, the black ones fit in really well with the darkness of the trees. So there was soot all over the trees. The black peppered moths camouflaged really, really well, and suddenly they were less likely to get eaten by predators. And the white moths were more likely because they didn't blend in as well. So this change that we made through the Industrial Revolution, making the bark of the trees darker, it actually changed how common this phenotype is in certain types of moths. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. If the new phenotype suits a change, so the change in the colour of the trees that's occurred to the environment, it will change the species rapidly. So there were more of the black moths than the white moths. Okay, so what I want you to do now is I've put some questions on Show My Homework that I want you to complete, please. And that concludes our lesson for today. I will be available to talk through the discussion feature on Show My Homework and 20 minutes at the end of the lesson on Zoom if you have any questions. It's not mandatory, but if you've got any pressing questions, then feel free to log on and ask me. Have a wonderful day.